Imagine Japan, but not the busy, high-tech place we know today. Think samurai, fancy ceremonies, and lots of traditions. That's Japan during the Edo period, from 1603 to 1868, a really interesting time in Japan's history. This time, named after its capital city, Edo, which is now Tokyo, saw a big change. It went from lots of fighting to a long time of peace and quiet. Culture blossomed, the economy grew, and everyone had a specific place in society. The Edo period is sometimes called the Tokugawa period, after the family that ruled Japan for over 250 years. This period is a big turning point. The fighting stopped, and Japan became one united country. We still see things from the Edo period today, in Japanese art, food, customs, and even how Japanese people see themselves. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The Tokugawa rulers, while keeping the peace, had very strict rules and kept Japan separate from other countries. This had big consequences later on, but the Edo period is still super important for understanding Japan's history and how it became the country it is today. To really get the Edo period, we need to look at the crazy times before it. The late 1500s in Japan was full of wars and fighting. Powerful lords called daimyo fought over land, causing lots of trouble. This time, called the Sengoku period, which means warring states, lasted over 100 years. Japan was divided and really needed some peace. Then, a smart and ambitious daimyo, Tokugawa Ieyasu, became important. He was a good leader and fighter. He spent years making himself stronger, making friends with other daimyo, and beating his enemies. The biggest battle happened in 1600, the Battle of Sekigahara. Ieyasu's army fought against a bunch of other clans. Ieyasu won, and that ended the Sengoku period, starting the Tokugawa rule. Ieyasu quickly took charge. He made a new government in Edo, a small fishing village that later became the huge city of Tokyo. Ieyasu's victory and the start of the Edo period changed Japan forever. It brought peace that lasted for a very long time. Tokugawa Ieyasu was a clever ruler. He knew that keeping the peace took more than just a strong army. He needed a way to stop the fighting from starting again. One smart thing he did was the alternate attendance system, called Senkin Kotai. This meant the daimyo had to live in Edo every other year. This stopped them from getting strong enough to fight the shogun, and when the daimyo were in Edo, their families stayed there like, well, guests of the shogun, making sure the daimyo behaved. The Tokugawa also made lots of rules about everyday life. They told people what clothes they could wear, and they had spies and censors to make sure nobody caused trouble. These rules might seem harsh now, but they kept the peace and let Japan have a long time of quiet and prosperity. Japan's relationship with other countries changed a lot during the Edo period. The Tokugawa rulers were worried about Christianity and European countries becoming too powerful. So they decided to keep Japan mostly separate from the rest of the world. This was called Sakoku. Starting in the 1630s, Japan closed its borders. Most foreigners couldn't come in, and trade was very limited. Only the Dutch could trade, and they had to stay on a tiny island in Nagasaki Harbor. Japanese people weren't allowed to travel to other countries. If they tried, they could be punished, even killed. The shogunate thought that by keeping Japan separate, they could stay in power and stop new, possibly dangerous ideas from spreading. Sakoku kept Japan safe, but it also meant Japan missed out on new inventions and ideas from Europe. This isolation caused problems later, when Japan had to open up again in the mid-1800s. Section 5. Thriving in seclusion art and culture in the Edo period. Even with all the Tokugawa rules, the Edo period was a great time for art and culture. Because they couldn't go to other countries, Japanese people focused on their own art, writing, and entertainment. This created some amazing things that are still part of Japanese culture today. One example is ukiyo-e, a type of colorful woodblock print showing everyday life. These prints showed everything: fashionable people, kabuki actors, pretty landscapes, and famous stories. Ukiyo-e became super popular, especially with merchants, showing what was trendy and what people liked. It was also a golden age for Japanese theater. Kabuki, a dramatic type of play with awesome costumes, makeup, and big movements, was a hit with everyone. Kabuki plays told historical stories, legends, and sometimes even talked about important social issues. Bunraku, a puppet theater, was also popular with amazing puppets, talented puppeteers, and great stories. Edo society was like a ladder. Everyone had their place. At the top was the shogun, the military leader who ruled for the emperor. Below him were the daimyo, the powerful lords. Then came the samurai warriors who worked for the daimyo and kept things in order. Below them were most people divided into 4 groups: farmers, artisans, merchants, and outcasts. Farmers, the largest group, grew food and paid taxes. Artisans made things like tools, weapons, and pots. Merchants, even though they had money, were lower down because, back then, farming was seen as more important than business. But merchants were still important for the economy, buying and selling things. At the bottom were the outcasts. These were people with jobs seen as unclean, like butchers and undertakers, and also entertainers and sex workers. Even though the Tokugawa wanted the samurai to be most important, the Edo period saw big economic changes. Merchants, even though they weren't high up socially, became very powerful. The Sankin Kotai system, meant to control the daimyo, actually helped the economy. The daimyo traveling to Edo with all their servants needed lots of things, so merchants who sold those things got rich. This created a system of borrowing and lending money like banks do today. Cities also grew a lot. Edo became one of the biggest cities in the world by the 1700s. Other castle towns where the daimyo lived also grew, becoming important places for business and culture. This growth of cities led to new entertainment like kabuki and ukiyo-e that city people really enjoyed. The long peace of the Edo period eventually came to an end. By the 1800s, several things weakened the Tokugawa. Money problems, unhappy people, and growing anger about Japan being isolated all caused problems. One big problem was the growing difference between the samurai and the rich merchants. Samurai, who weren't allowed to do business, struggled. Merchants, even with all their money, were still looked down on. Then, in 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry and his American ships arrived in Edo Bay. Perry wanted Japan to open up for trade. He had a powerful navy to back him up. This shocked Japan, showing how weak the Tokugawa had become. Many people started to turn against the government. The Edo period, lasting over 250 years, shaped Japan in many ways. We can still see its influence in art, food, customs, and how Japanese people think of themselves. The peace of the Tokugawa let culture grow, creating amazing art, writing, and entertainment that we still enjoy today. The Edo period also helped Japan become a strong economy later on. Powerful merchants, new ways of handling money, and the growth of cities all helped. Even though the strict rules and isolation of the Edo period caused problems later, they also made Japanese culture unique. The importance of order, hierarchy, and respecting authority are still important in Japan. The Edo period, even with its problems, is a fascinating and important part of Japanese history, showing us how this amazing country became what it is today.